So I want to say, first of all, thank you all for coming. I'm honored, really, to be hosting this panel again for the second year in a row. We did a panel last year on affordability. We had a great group of panelists last year. This year, it was timely for, we've got some elections coming up, so it was wonderful to be able to get some really courageous people to join us because they're putting themselves out there to run, to help lead our city. And I think that should be recognized. This is amazing civic participation, and it's wonderful to have them here putting themselves out there like that. I'm going to introduce everybody quickly because we want to get to questions. First, here to my right, it's Cary Moon. She lives in Pike Place Market neighborhood. I took this right off your website. Okay. She lives in Pike Place Market neighborhood with her husband and 2 teenage children. Cary helped manage her family's small manufacturing business. It was partly owned by its 100 employees. As director for People's Waterfront Coalition, Cary built a movement and vision to save 22 acres of public land on the waterfront and is now being implemented by the city. She co-created the Pioneer Square Neighborhood Plan and won an Outstanding Achievement Award in Historic Preservation Planning. She holds a BS in Engineering from the University of Michigan, Masters in Landscape Architecture and Urban Design from the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speak up.
What's that?
Can you speak up?
Sure. Yeah. Everybody, you're in the back, Allison. Tell me if you can't hear me at any time, and I will also try and like do this. Teresa Mosqueda. She's running a citywide position, Seattle City Council position 8. She grew up in the Pacific Northwest and is a 3rd-generation Mexican American and daughter of educators and social justice advocates. At AFL-CIO, she's worked to lift up low-wage workers, support small businesses, protect immigrant rights, create healthy and safe workplaces, and promote health care for all. She graduated from the UW, earned a master's degree in public transportation from Evergreen State College. And then Alan Durning, he just introduced him, or was introduced, did the keynote, his Sightline. So we're going to have a we're going to do a panel. We're saving space for Jenny again when she gets here. Big round of applause for her. How we're going to run this is less of a debate and more of a discussion. I know it's going to be tempting. We've got an electric, potential for an electric panel here. And that's why Alan is here, to ground us all. So this electricity is not too shocking. He's going to ground us in facts along the way. So, without further ado, I've sent questions to everybody ahead of time so they kind of know general direction. We're going to be talking about supply and demand, the intersection of green and affordability, better density, and then how do we get some affordability now. I'm going to stop and at about half an hour in and let the audience ask questions. Oh, ladies and gentlemen.
Apologies.
Okay.
I got lost.
That happens. We went ahead and started. I just got done with introductions, Jenny. So I'm going to introduce you now, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm Aaron.
Hi, Aaron. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you. Jenny Durkan. She was born in Seattle in a family of 8 children and is raising 2 sons here with a partner, Dan. She helped pay for law school, working at airport baggage handler and Teamster. Served 2 years as a Jesuit volunteer corps member, working in a remote Alaska village, fishing village as a high school teacher. Worked in law school with Black Prisoners Project and Monroe Reformatory and in public defender's office. She was appointed by President Obama to becoming the first openly gay U.S. attorney in history. Graduated from Notre Dame and University of Washington Law School. All right. I'm going to just get into it with a little bit of context before I ask the first question. This is the 2nd year I've hosted this panel. Last year we had a council member on the panel, the director for Washington State Housing Finance Commission, the executive director for the NBA, and the legend keynote speaker that year, Hunter Lovins. They were on my panel, similar panel. We talked about affordability. Great ideas were offered, and we left feeling better about ourselves for having the discussion. Yet, year over year, our housing inventory of property listings is down by 17.5%. Year over year. This time last year, there was more inventory than there is this year in the city of Seattle. As interest rates climb, inventory will likely continue to shrink because homeowners, the biggest source of additional inventory when they sell their homes, will be less inclined to sell their home and get into the market in a rising interest rate environment. So this indicates a massive supply side problem. And while tackling supply has proven difficult, taxing non-occupant homeowners is taxing demand and may or may not limit demand, and will certainly take a long time to learn what, if any, positive impact that will create. So, what is one thing you can offer to increase supply as soon as possible? Go ahead, Cary.
So I'm going to quibble with some of your math and your logic later. I'll accept it for now. But one thing to increase supply is we've got to look at the huge percentage of land in single-family zoning in our city. It is limiting the amount of land that we can build new housing on, and it's creating this class structure where wealthy folks are more and more protected from a healthy society, where we need to have people living at all incomes and all ages and stages in life in community together. And I believe we need to really look at single-family zoning and reduce it to somewhere between 0 and a lot less than we have now, and open up the process so that we can build more duplexes, row houses, stacked flats, congregate housing, clustered housing. We need to be looking at how do we get more gentle infill development in single-family zones by changing the zoning. So that's one quick answer.
That's great, and that's what we're looking for. We can quibble afterwards. Teresa, go ahead, and then we'll just go on down the line.
Speak up, please. I think I'll stand. Can you hear me better? Thank you. So first, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and for the folks who put on this panel. I am incredibly honored to be up here and look forward to learning from this panel and from all of you. I've already learned a tremendous amount from Alan this morning. And we'll just say that this is the issue that we continue to hear about on the campaign trail. And I would say this is one of the main issues that drove me into wanting to run for Seattle City Council. As you may know, I'm a renter right now. I rent in Queen Anne in a beautiful brick apartment building, single room apartment building. And I have been trying to look to try to buy our first home. I just got married last weekend, and we've been looking, thank you, we've been looking to try to buy for the last year and a half. And it is incredibly sad. I don't want to say unfortunate, because fortune has nothing to do with this. We could have actually figured out a way to address this many years ago. It is unfair that in a city as prosperous as Seattle, we do not have enough housing. Not enough housing for folks like me that I consider in the missing middle, not enough housing for folks that are in the lower income spectrum, not enough housing for the folks who live here and the folks who are going to be coming to our city because of our prosperity, our environment, and I think because we are a welcoming city and we will remain that. So for me, one of the main things that I want to do on City Council is to work to actually create the affordable housing that we need now. And when I say affordable, that means everything from market rate and down. I think we can do a lot more to address the maps that Alan shared with us this morning and reverse the trends that we saw with the single family zones that have been created and expanded over the last few decades, almost century now in Seattle. It is unacceptable that in a city as prosperous as Seattle, we do not have enough housing for the folks who work in our city. We don't have enough housing for the folks who want to retire in our city. So what I'd like to do, in addition to the recommendations that have been proposed under HALA, is to actually look at every parcel of developable land that's owned by the city, county, state, Sound Transit. Think now about how we turn that into affordable housing. I'll give you a few examples later on, but I think what we need is ADUs, DADUs, duplexes, triplexes, triplexes. We need to create co-housing options, and we need to create more co-ops. And I told you I live in Queen Anne, right? People think of Queen Anne as the place where we don't want to ruin the character of the neighborhood. I go on walks every day in that neighborhood. If you're on the ground, you see the 2 and 3 entrances. You see the apartments in that area. You see what was possible in the past. We need to figure out how we can actually create the density we need in our city now so we can all afford to live there.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask the question again, but one.
So unfair.
Now we know. Now we know who Teresa's going to be our problem.
That's a solution.
There we go. Solution. Okay, so what one thing, Jenny, can you offer to increase supply as soon as possible?
I think one thing we can do, and I'll stand up too so people in the back can hear, one thing we could do immediately to increase supply is that in the single-family housing zoning, to make it easier for people to get the backyard cottages and mother-in-laws. I've talked to a lot of people who have tried to do that process, and it takes too long and it's too expensive. You have to hire the architects and the lawyers and go through the permitting process. And I've talked to some family, I think in the future, given where housing prices is and what families are, you could have a single family home that has a legal mother-in-law and a small backyard cottage that is a triplex overnight. But it is one that people in the neighborhood know and see and they're used to. And you start with that kind of infill zoning, add supply immediately, and as that works, people say, hey, density is a good thing. Every neighborhood has to get more dense. And we need to bring it on as quickly as possible. And I think if I'm mayor, we'll have a permitting process that not only puts affordable housing at the front of the queue, but we'll try to develop some zoning standards or permitting standards so that if you want to have a backyard cottage, if your lot is 5,000 square feet, you can pick one of these 3 cottage designs and you'll get permitted as quickly as possible. If you want something fancy, it's going to take longer. But you limit the size, you make it on scale for the neighborhood, you just, there's the urban myth that the backyard cottage is going to be the monstrosity that's bigger than any house in the neighborhood. So you've got to control that, but I think we can get that kind of density really quickly in Seattle.
Thank you. So Alan, you got anything new to add to that? I know our backyard cottages there's a process already in place for that.
I'll give you 2 really fast. First is we should eliminate the occupancy requirement across the board in the city of Seattle. There's no reason to have that law in the books. A number of cities in the Northwest have eliminated them. There are other rules that prevent crowding. It's just residual law that gets in the way of renting out extra bedrooms in existing housing. That's immediately available housing. The second thing is we should just revoke the 2014 City Council action that almost banned micro apartments in the city. Just undo that and we will again have 1,000 or 2,000 additional units coming online as we did in 2013, 2014 for micro apartments. That's all.
That's awesome. Thanks. So often when we get in conversations about affordability and increased housing, we separate sustainability. This is the Bill Green Conference. Last year, I asked this exact same question, and I quoted a friend of mine at that time as well. He said, issues of sustainability and poverty, and poverty are inextricably linked. Yet, so often we, decouple those two. If you have an affordable home, it's not usually sustainable, and a sustainable home is usually only accessible to folks at the other end of the income spectrum. So can you, Alan, let's start with you again, can you share an idea or ways that we can bring these 2 historically decoupled building approaches together?
A short answer. The city of Seattle should ban homeowner association and condo and apartment rules that make clotheslines illegal. That's not a big answer to your question, but we should just get rid of them. We have, I don't know, 100 dwellings, 100 apartment buildings, condo buildings in the city of Seattle where you can't use a clothesline. And that's ridiculous. You should get rid of it.
Go ahead, Jim.
I think one thing we can do is city lights have programs to assist people in making their homes more efficient. I think we could expand that program, particularly in affordable housing areas and developments,
Yeah.
so you can have low-interest, long-term loans that there's not barriers, and have actually a program where that can be forgiven over time. We got to use our government resources to help those people who are disadvantaged to get more efficient.
It's a great, great idea.
All right, are you limiting us to one idea?
Yeah, give us one. Give us one. I don't want to give everybody
All
an
right.
opportunity.
I am on the board of the Pacific Medical Tower building, the old PacMed building, the beautiful kind of Art Deco building that used to be Amazon. And it's now the Public Hospital Preservation Authority District. And it's a beautiful building that we've renovated, but on the north lot there of this public land, it's a parking lot in the heart of the city. So we began about a year ago to try to make that affordable housing. And we've been working with the city and the state and the county to get the resources necessary to create affordable housing. Now we're gonna have mixed income housing above a child care facility, above a senior assisted living facility, and right next to a community clinic. But when we went to the city and said we'd like to create this mixed income housing, they said it needs to be 1-for-1, low income and market rate. But we're trying to create low income housing that's for 2 and 3 bedrooms. So I think we need to do a lot more to incentivize 2 and 3 bedroom creation for below market rate housing, so that we can actually see folks who live with their families, and by families I mean large definition of families. Let's create multi-generational families living in our city. That's how we create density and community cohesion. I'd like to do more to actually incentivize 2 and 3 bedroom creations in our heart of our city.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, because I was so polite the
Yes.
first time, I'm going to give you 5 things, but really quick. So
Great.
first, I think we need to open up the opportunity for use of new materials. Concrete and CLT, cross-laminated timber, are both materials we should be using that are healthy and good, but they're currently very hard to use or not allowed in our code for these kind of homes. Second, I think we need to match nonprofit partners with folks in low-income neighborhoods who want to do energy retrofits, who want to do a backyard cottage, but they don't have the technical skills, the access to capital, and the know-how. Let's get nonprofit partners in there to help them so they keep ownership. We need public funding for retrofits. Sometimes capital is the hardest thing to come by. We know there's long-term benefits for energy retrofits, but low-income people can't get access to capital. And we need to match that with employment opportunities for folks from low-income communities. The Alliance for Jobs in Clean Energy and SAGE and Got Green have laid out what the environmental justice movement looks like in our city towards housing and affordability and access to food. They have exactly the right approach. Let's follow them. And again, let's use surplus public land. We have hundreds of parcels of public land that is lying fallow, not being used.
Yeah.
We've got to make that available for production of green, low-income housing.
That's great. Love to see some of that land come available. You know, I'm going to pause because I think that you all probably have a couple questions that you may want to ask. But I wanted to share with you something real quick that I Googled this morning. Bertha Landis. She was the first female mayor of a major American city, serving as mayor of City of Seattle from 1926 to 1928. After years of civic activism, primarily with women's organizations, she was elected to Seattle City Council in 1922 and became the council's first president in 1924. She is to date Seattle's only female mayor. It's wonderful. It's what an honor.
We're changing that.
We're changing that.
And we're hoping it's a trend, not an anomaly.
That's right. This is the start. So I'm really honored, and I'm sure you all are honored to be here. Who would like to ask a question of any of our panelists? Yes, please.
It's just a general question. I don't actually have anybody for but
Sure.
I've heard a couple times mention of stacked flats, and I didn't actually know that that's not allowed in the city of Seattle. And thinking about it, I'm a real estate broker, and I have several, we'll call them potential clients, who have lovely old craftsman houses, or 4 squares or whatever, but 2,000 to 3,000 square feet, 2 senior citizens living in them, and they don't want to move to a room, they want to buy something. Why are the stacked flats not allowable? And what? Because they want an elevator and single level living, and that would free up so much family housing in our city.
Yeah.
If we could migrate these people to single level living that you can't find elsewhere in the city?
That sounds like a great rounding question.
We want you to answer first.
But the Hall recommendation said that you could allow stacked flats in the single-family zones. There are some zones in the city where you can do stacked flats, but you can't do it in single-family zones, and we ought to. Any more? No.
Can you speak up a little bit, Alan? Can you speak a little louder?
Louder? Yeah, I have a hard time with loud.
Sorry.
I'm just saying that the Hall recommendation.
You want to whisper it to me, and I'll
pass notes. I said that the Hall recommendation specifically called for allowing stacked flats along with small duplex and small triplex. The proposal for single-family zones was don't allow a bigger total footprint or total floor area ratio on the lot, but allow people to divide it up more. Now, that would be mostly for rental. I think we also need to facilitate ownership of small condos so that you could have 3 floors and have them separately owned. There are some neighborhoods in Vancouver, BC, where there are special provisions under law to allow separate ownership within a single-family lot, which is currently not allowed in Seattle, or it's not allowed without some extreme legal intervention and a lot of legal bills. But that's a way that we could get more ownership housing in addition to just straight density.
Any of you want to comment on that? Anybody, or we can go to another question?
Can I add to that real quick?
You bet, man.
Part of the reason why we haven't seen that so much is for small builders like us, even big builders, we have a fear of litigation. So condominium litigation reform is very paramount to being able to build stacked flat housing.
Great. Yeah, so for anybody who didn't hear in the background, we need, what Kevin was saying is we need condominium litigation reform so that builders are more likely to develop condos because the liability is so high. So I'm gonna go, we'll give you guys some more opportunities to be thinking. I wanted to talk a little bit, I listened to, how many people listened or saw the debate 2 nights
Aaron,
ago?
can I just maybe respond to that a little
sure.
bit? I agree. I think that we need to look and encourage more condominium development and have some reforms to the law. But we have to be careful because we've had a history in this region of having shoddy developers who build condominium projects and then go out of business, and the people who buy that are left holding the bag. So I think while we do need reforms, we also have to make sure that it's not encouraging subpar developments that get us moving in the wrong direction.
It's a great comment to make at the Build Green conference because Build Green builders build beyond code.
Right.
We're not simple code builders, and our product's better quality to begin with. So I'm going to make a quote. I'm going to read a quote from the Atlantic. As we're talking about communities, community development, I want to ground us in a little history. To begin with, many of the arbiters of taste of the bungalow era believed these new bungalow neighborhoods ruined the character of the places they were built, just as the new apartment buildings are maligned today. They even had a snappy put-down for it: bungalow disease. Architectural Record reviewed Seattle's building boom in 1912 and, in the otherwise positive article, pronounced the quality of its new homes as disappointing. Critics accused the new bungalow neighborhoods not just of being ugly, but ripping apart the social fabric of the city. We have a history of housing development in Seattle that predated us, the frontier, pioneers from coming here. Housing has changed since that time, from long homes all the way through to today. So as we think about engaging communities, and it is incredibly important. If you know Green Canopy, we focus on engaging communities. We also have to focus on code and cost of materials, labor, and bring these together. So bring the constituents, including the communities, all together. Can you share one strategy or approach to bring communities, land use codes, city planners, developers, multifamily and single family, out of siloed conversations and into a collaborative approach to increasing density without displacement?
All right, yes, I can, because there are great models. But first I want to just, that phrase, ripping apart social fabric, that is classist, racist dog whistle right there. That is, we deserve to keep our neighborhood reserved for people like us, And I don't think that matches our values in Seattle. I think in Seattle we care about building healthy society where people, all ages, races, stages of life, can live together in community, because we all know that's what makes healthy society. And I think we need to start the question there. Is how can we come together and build a community that works for everybody, that's inclusive to everybody, that's affordable to people at different incomes, and start with a constructive future vision, because that's how you have a creative, constructive dialogue with folks who have been in silos. We used to do this pretty well in Seattle. We had a neighborhood planning process that the city led and brought communities and businesses together towards achieving the future goals for that neighborhood. It worked. We tore it apart over the last 2 administrations, not sure why, but there's a pretty good model that we invented right here in Seattle that we could bring back. And I'll give you one example. The El Centro de la Raza project is a brilliant example of a community and businesses and the city coming together towards shared goals around affordable, inclusive, equitable development that works for the community, that works for the communities of color that are nearby, and that offers the services, the retail space, the affordable housing, and the civic heart of the place, in the plaza, in the station coffee shop. It's just a great model of doing it right, and I think we can take that model and replicate it again and again in every neighborhood.
Thank you. I appreciate you commenting on the social fabric phrase that was quoted in that, and I put that in there specifically as a builder and as an infill builder. Many of you in the room that are, we have experienced that in many neighborhoods that we build, when neighbors come up and say those exact words to us without knowing what they're saying. So I appreciate you calling that out. Teresa.
I just want to underscore the article that you referenced, but also kind of bring us back to how the classist segregation very much mirrors the racist segregation that is rooted in redlining, which our city still suffers from. And I was thinking about that as we saw the slides this morning. So first, our communities who are the lowest income and mostly communities of color get redlined into areas that weren't allowed to get home loans. And so they're prevented from home ownership, which obviously creates equity, right? I'm interested in how we create enough affordable housing across the spectrum so that more families can actually create that equity, and that we develop housing so that it is more equitable. I think the problem that we see within Seattle right now is the historic consequence of redlining and then the expansion of the single family zones throughout our city, which the maps clearly demonstrated this morning. And you pair that, and we have so far to go to get away from both the classist and the racist history that we see that is embedded in our zoning laws. So I'm very interested, as you said, in bringing folks together to rapidly address these issues, from everything from addressing zoning to how we authorize and move forward with development. I actually had El Centro de la Raza's Roberto Maesa Plaza on my notes to talk about as well. But I think there is a history behind that, which is that the community had to push really hard to allow for the art facades to be included on those buildings. They had to push hard to allow for the plaza to actually be in existence so that there's a gathering space. And the concept of having women and minority-owned businesses on the first floor is something that was rooted in what the community was saying. And we had to, I would say, they had to bring along the city and the folks who approved it. And over time they got there, and it's something that we are so incredibly proud of in our city. And I think there is a lesson to be learned there, that when we bring together developers, community activists, folks who want to see art and social cohesion, and people who are actually going to live there and be the shop owners on the first floors, along with childcare providers, I might say, which we have a dearth of in our city, I think then we can create the opportunity for folks to actually live and work in the place that they call home, which, by the way, is across the street from a Union grocery store and across the street from a transit hub. These are all great things, but every time that we want to create this model, we shouldn't have to have this uphill fight. We got to take lessons learned and allow for that art and culture to be integrated from the beginning. Great. And I think you all do that.
Thank you.
I think that what we've heard is exactly right. I can remember talking to Roberto Maestas many times on his vision for that place when he sees the school and that heart of the community, and talking to him about how he saw it as something that could be adding to and contributing to the community, and then how El Centro had to push for years to try to get exactly what it is today, this shared vision where people can come together, where there's housing. And we see it played out again. There's another center down in South Seattle called the Ethiopian Community Center, where they've been pushing for years. They own the property, the community came together, and they've been pushing to try to get a similar model, community center, plaza, shared housing above. And the Office of Housing is resisted because they say, no, we only do housing. So I think cities have to break down those silos and work with communities to build those kind of things. And I think it comes with shared vision. The question was originally, how do we get people bought into these? And I think if you buy people into the vision first and get people around a table, then it's easier to implement it. But instead, the city was not a partner to the vision. And I think the city has to be a full partner. And when it's not a partner, it then has to get out of the way.
I'll pass.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned a lot about Hala today, and I think we've heard that enough today. Anyway, I'm going to pause again and give anybody here an opportunity to ask a question, if you would like. Yeah, Tom.
I guess I'll ask a question about the overall greenhouse gas emissions policy and how we're going to continue to reduce energy use and greenhouse gases, both in the new buildings and in electrifying cars, and particularly with the equality issues of how can you get really supercharge the process so it gets going even faster to get charging stations where and lower cost vehicles, use electric vehicles to people that are renters, because right now you have to basically go home and have an electric car. So just thought I'd ask that question: what policy ideas you have that are above and beyond what the city's already doing?
Great, Alan. Since you passed, we're gonna have you take that one.
You guys heard the question in the back there? Okay, so so here's the thing. The most important greenhouse gas initiative for the city of Seattle is to build more housing. Right? I mean, we should build it green, and yeah, we should facilitate the transition to clean powered transportation, transit, cycling, electric cars and all the rest. But look, we've got huge numbers of people trying to come to Seattle, and the choice is that they're going to live in the city in a walkable area where they can live a low carbon lifestyle, or they're going to live further out where their lifestyle is going to occasion much larger greenhouse gas emissions. So talking about putting in more solar powered charging stations, that's fine. But the hard thing and the main work for us to do is to allow more housing so that we can grow into a dense, walkable, post-carbon city.
I'm going to agree and disagree with Alan a little bit. I agree that we've got to do that. That's a primary solution, but I don't think it's an either or. If you look at where we are today, the largest source of our emissions are our cars. And getting people out of their single occupancy vehicles is getting more dense in the city, but it's also having better transit. So people are getting in transit, walking, biking. But we also have to look at electrification. I propose that the city should electrify its fleet as quickly as possible. We should work with Metro and County to electrify buses. And then we also have to work with car share, taxis, ride share. The recent study said about 30% of the cars circulating in Seattle, which were all carbon-based, are Uber and Lyft. We've got to work to change that footprint to go from being carbon to electrifying, but the key is exactly what you say, having a charging system that doesn't further harden the inequities we have, because there's parts of the city that are either not just equipped for charging because people live in houses with garages, access to charging, or they're multifamily housing. So we have to, I think we work with the industries before they can bring in autonomous vehicles and as we electrify, they help pay for the charging infrastructure. A couple of cities on the West Coast required ride shares to be electrified, and now they've reversed that because there wasn't an adequate charging system in place. So we need to do that, I think, and we also need to do what Alan says, building more housing in Seattle, getting denser everywhere so people can, walk, ride bikes, and live somewhere where they're just commuting by foot.
So I think we all know that some of the folks who are getting pushed out of our urban core are the most transit reliant folks. The folks who are now taking 2 and 3 buses to get into the urban core so that they can go to work. And sometimes they have 2, if not 3 jobs. So imagine your life constantly on the bus or in a car driving to 2 or 3 jobs. You're not going to be home in between shifts to take care of your kiddos. You're not going to be home to have a higher quality of life. I do agree that one of the main ways that we can help reduce carbon emissions is by creating the opportunity for folks to live in the urban core. Last night I was at a forum in North Seattle, and a lot of the people in the room were saying, what are you going to do about the cost of energy and the cost of my property taxes? And I think that there is some kind of convergence of ideas here, because if we create enough affordable housing throughout our city that is built in the way that was described this morning, that saves energy, that is built with the technology that you all put forward every day, and we can reduce carbon emissions from our own homes, make sure that more people can walk instead of drive, and finally, if we electrify our transit grid and actually get us off of gas and diesel and onto a full electrified grid finally, I think that we can really see some changes in terms of the emission. It's not hyperbole to say that if we create the housing in our communities, we're going to see fewer people having to commute long distances. We all, I think, suffered in that. This morning, if you drove here, you saw people waiting, just stopped on the freeway. That is not good for our health, our personal health, our mental health, the health of the environment, or the health of our local economy. So I think it's imperative of us to create the housing that we need now, electrify the grid, create more options like the ones that you all are building today, and we can continue to see cost savings and then also savings for our planet.
I love this question because this is where Seattle should shine. This is where Seattle should be leading the whole country as a leader in getting to 100% renewables, a clean energy economy, and a less car-dependent city. We all have those values. We all want to do it, so let's solve the problems that are the barriers that are keeping us from being that. So I think, number one, we've got to recognize compact growth is the main answer, as Alan said, but we have to focus on affordable compact growth. As Teresa mentioned, the people who get pushed out are not people like me. I've lived car-free since 1994 because I can afford to live in Pike Place Market and be at the center of every bus system in the world in that place. I can afford to pay more in housing and not have a car, but most folks can't. Most folks are being pushed out who have 2 and 3 jobs and have to drive. So we have to focus our compact growth on affordable housing. We need to break down the silos in transportation funding. We all want more transit. There's so many communities that have said, I would take the bus if I could, but unless I get out to the bus stop by 7 a.m., I will see every bus pass me by because they're already full. So we have got to figure out how to get more of our huge transportation budget in this state available to adding transit service, because we know long-term that's the main part of the solution. Making neighborhoods accessible by transit and biking and walking, compact growth, and focus on having charging stations in long-term parking lots. Those are all part of the solution. We know we can do it. We just have to break down the political barriers to get there.
I'm gonna give you an answer too, Tom, and this is something you and I have talked about and conspired on over the years, actually since I think probably 2008, which is information is knowledge, and without information, markets don't move. We've been talking about a point of sale energy audit requirement or disclosure for years, and we were working with Portland on that as well, and Portland went ahead and beat us to it. Our city needs a point of sale energy disclosure for our homes so actually people understand what the performance of a home they should expect, the energy performance of a home. And if you guys are not familiar with that, I'm happy to talk to you more about that later.
I love it. I'm adding it to my list.
Okay.
Hey, Aaron, there's one other thing we didn't talk about is, you know, I think we've got to be looking broad at innovative pilot projects as well. And there is a, I don't know if people are familiar with the Eco District that's right downtown Seattle, where the Weston building, which is, you know, one of those critical facilities that has all these data things, and they kept adding cooling towers as they would add more servers, more servers. Pretty soon they ran out of space on the roof, so they went to the roof next door and started adding cooling. And finally, an engineer at McKinstry said, why are we just giving away all that energy to the sky? Why don't we use it? It's now piped across the street, and it's what heats the Amazon biosphere. I think, you know, we have so many data centers in Western Washington. We got to be looking at how do we capture all of that energy and use it for a positive purpose.
Cool.
Or warm.
Yeah. Right. Jenny, a couple nights ago at the debate, you talked about spectrum development. You all are familiar with spectrum? Gabe Grant and the project that they're doing, workforce housing without subsidies. And we talked about the need to cut the red tape to help make these projects become a reality. I had lunch with Gabe earlier this week, actually, and he talked about the permitting process that he went through for that. Horrible, lengthy, brutal, from design review all the way throughout.
Historic review.
Yeah, historic review. You mentioned this morning as well. Expedited permitting is already in place for nonprofit affordable builders. Nonprofit affordable builders. But they also, too, get bogged down in DCI bureaucracy. So you may not be aware, but we have a priority green queue in the city of Seattle that expedites permitting for 4-star built green and above, I believe. Yeah. Which is awesome. That has been hugely successful in transitioning traditional code-built builders to doing built green, certified buildings. Can you share a specific incentive, one specific incentive or approach that we could put in place to get traditional market rate builders to begin building at least some affordable units? Anybody want to take a stab?
Yeah, I propose in front of the queue too. We've got to expand our permitting abilities, and the other thing we have to do, instead of having one foot in front of the other where you go to SDOT and then you go to utilities and then you know, the permitting process is a gauntlet. You have to simplify it and break down those silos between the city agencies. And so that for those projects we are trying to incentivize, affordable housing, green, low-income housing, we got to get a way to permit them faster and drive the incentive to people to say, that's what we want to build.
Yeah, Cary, sorry. You were looking at me. So
Alan was going to stand.
Yeah, let Alan go first, then I'll go.
Right on.
Well, there's this thing called the mandatory housing affordability proposal that creates a very strong incentive to build affordable housing. In fact, more or less a requirement, but we have to do the math right, as I mentioned before. My view about the permitting process is that we should streamline it for everyone and focus on other kinds of incentives than getting to go to the front of a broken system. In design review, in environmental review, and in historic review, we ought to have the community discussions about what we want first and put that in our plans. And then if you want to build what's in the plan, you should be allowed to build it.
Yeah.
Right? The uncertainty is what drives up the cost. If we have certainty about, you know, in this neighborhood we want these kind of building. So we could put the process, the Seattle process up front, and then streamline the design review, the design, historic, and secret review for everyone, as opposed to this kind of queue jumping approach, which makes me nervous.
Yeah, right.
I agree. That's the place to get to. I 100% agree, Alan.
So this is a really good question because we all want the city to be efficient and effective and get the job done quickly, and there are a lot of reasons why they don't. Part of it is we've had this tremendous surge of building. We've had to hire a lot of young planners, and the planners take a lot longer to figure out how to get to yes than the planners who are more professional and have more expertise. So it's a matter of more training, more seasoned planners working in the departments. It's a matter of what Alan said, absolutely, design review process broken, environmental review process broken. Historical review has to be kind of slow, so I'm not sure it's broken, but how can we streamline it? So we've got to get more professionals involved in those processes and do the community work up front, and maybe not try to make the community the design review process. Maybe get the community's input and then let professionals do design review and environmental review to get there. And I think we need, you know, to open up a little bit more to use of innovative materials and get builders that are using innovative green materials also bumped to the front of the queue, because we want to be an innovative city, but Portland's lapped us many times, and we need to learn from them about how to use innovative materials, do a lot more pilot projects, figure out what works, then scale it up.
Yeah, great. Teresa.
I mean, I think about this in terms of similar conversations I've been having with folks about how we expedite ST3's development. We really need to move faster to get us into the 21st century and get sound transit created throughout our community so that we are truly connected. And a lot of folks are concerned about that, and I said, but if you have conversations early, if you have conversations with community early and get everybody's thoughts and ideas, maybe you're not going to get 100% buy-in, but people will feel heard. I think that's one of the most important things, so I echo that point. The other thing I'd say is, You know, I'm really interested in serving on city council because I understand that it's not just about passing the policy, right? It's not about just being there when the cameras are there when you sign a bill. And you talked a lot this morning about how folks were getting stuck in the permitting process up on 64th and Finney. I used to live on 78th and Finney. I know that exact building very well. And I know across the street, they've already created the housing density that's needed right along that Finney Ridge. So why is it taking so long to create the housing that we need now when folks are getting stuck in the system? I served on the Affordable Care Act's exchange board, right, for 4 years. It was 4 long years as we were setting that up. And I continue to tell people the goal in health reform wasn't creating a website. Just like the goal in HALA wasn't passing the recommendations. The goal in the Affordable Health Care Act was to actually make sure people got health insurance and that they could see the doctor. And in the early months, people were getting stuck in that website. They couldn't get the health insurance they needed. I was getting 5 calls a day from people saying, what is going on? I need my health insurance. And I see that very similar to what's going on right now. If people are getting stuck in the process, we are not getting folks the homes that they need, the affordable housing options, and creating the density that our city needs right now so that folks can afford to live here. And quite literally, you cannot be healthy if you don't have sustainable housing. So I see a lot of connections there. I'll champion making sure people can get through the process.
Great, thank you. So any questions from the audience? Okay, now we're starting to get some arms going. Yes?
So Alan, in your presentation this morning, you showed a lot of modest multifamily options that were not legal. I was wondering if there's a limitation on single-family housing to how big they can be, or if there should, it might be controversial, but should there be more limitation on single-family size?
Okay, could the folks in the back hear her question? Could you hear my question about whether you could hear her question? One of a proposal from Portland that I wish we'd thought of in HALA was there's an infill proposal in Portland that would allow many of the HALA-like flexibility requirements, small duplex, small triplex, little clusters of cottages and so on. You can build those, but if you want to build a new single-family house, it's going to be, there's actually a reduction in the FAR, right? It's a combined small dwellings are legal and McMansions are not, right? I think that might have been fun to try in Seattle. I wonder whether we've had the same kind of villagers with pitchforks storming all the meetings if we were coming down on the McMansions as well. Is it great housing policy? I don't know. Maybe not. But politically, it would have been cool.
Can I?
Yeah.
I would have loved that. And I got to tell you a little anecdote because I live in an 8-unit apartment building, right? It's a beautiful brick building. And there was this little lot next to us, and this is on 10th and Olympic in Queen Anne, that had a 2-bedroom home. It was a little crooked, it was a little falling down, but they put a for sale sign up. And I walked in, and the thing that the realtor told me was, looked me up and down and said, just so you know, this is cash only. And I was like, okay. So I turned around, I walked back out. Well, immediately it sold, right? And instead of putting up the density that I'd like to see along that street, because it was once upon a time permitted, and they put up a single family home. But that's one thing. They put up a single family home that is 4.5 stories. It is a wall to wall, one house, bigger than our 8-unit apartment. And you know how many people live there? 2 adults and 1 toddler. It is enormous. And so I think if there's a way for us to incentivize folks, if they want to be in those areas that once upon a time allowed apartments like mine, we got to figure out a way to either do what Portland has done or go back to create the housing. Because I look at that building every day and I think that could have at least fit 10 apartment buildings.
Great. I think Bruce in the back there.
Yeah, my question is related to you guys have been talking about streamlining the permitting process, and then it could involve a shift where, communities engage on the planning side, on the front end. When you get into the design review process, it gets muddied up, so having, professionals involved in that, maybe less community would be better in order to streamline, as long as it conforms to the plan. But you may get pushback from communities or neighborhoods that have historically been involved in that process. I wondered about your thoughts on addressing that. And I'm thinking also, once the a sign goes up and we're going to change this building, and even once the building starts, I'm thinking about an actual project, you know, inside a neighborhood, that's when you might ruffle people's feathers that live in the community and they want to have an opportunity to engage. So I'm just thinking how you address that community engagement piece.
I'll start. So I think the way we used to do neighborhood planning was a really good model to start with. The city set the growth targets by neighborhood. They laid out this urban village strategy, said we're trying to make compact growth happen, walkable neighborhoods, well served by transit, with a commercial strip, and people having access to everything they need in the community. We started with that model. We started with the targets and the numbers of folks who are moving to the neighborhood, and then put all the tools on the table about what kind of growth we want and what kind of growth will work to create a healthy society in this neighborhood. I'm exaggerating, but we didn't do all that in neighborhood planning. Now I'm shifting into how to use the model of neighborhood planning to do that for the future. And I think if you involve the community and build buy-in and build vision based on what works for the community and what they want to see happen, they'll be a lot more likely to be supportive, because it's only when people feel like the city is imposing things top down and they weren't involved, they don't understand what's coming, that people hunker down and protect their private interest. If we can all define what it means to have a city that watches out for the well-being of everyone, that wants to be inclusive and affordable, and here's how we're doing it with your input in your neighborhood, that's a completely different conversation. So I think excellent community input up front, and then community being able to watch and see what's happening once we get buy-in. Because I used to be on the design commission, which was different than design review board. It was a professional group that only reviewed public projects. And it worked to have community input where people came and gave comments and gave ideas, but it was the job of the professionals on the commission to make the decisions. And it worked pretty well. I think that could be applied to the design review process too.
Cool. Yeah, go. Do it.
I think there's sort of two populations that we might be talking about. I think for the folks that you might be referencing, I think there's a lot of fear of the unknown, fear of how it's going to change things, and people don't like change sometimes. I think for another part of the community, there's distrust, especially among communities of color, especially among folks who are lower income, who haven't been reached out to proactively historically. And I think that mistrust is valid in many cases, especially when you look at how many folks are experiencing being displaced. So I think that in order to have a conversation with the community, we both have to address the folks who are fearful of the unknown, but also people who have real lived experiences of being marginalized, and think about that just proactively on the front end on how we engage folks. I don't know that I have the answer to how we do that, but if we think about that from the get-go and we design community engagement and conversations intentionally thinking about the ways folks have been historically left out of our conversations, I think that can help make people feel a little bit more bought in. Also, I think having people who have the lived experience of living in our city and wanting to afford their own homes and being policymakers and reaching out to the community through that lens could help as well. But I don't think there's an easy solution, but I think we have to recognize that's some of the baggage people are carrying.
One thing I think we have to be careful about, we're here at Build Green, and so we're assuming projects that are going to be built green. There is still incentive in the marketplace for that not to be the case. It can be cheaper to not build green. And while we expedite the process, I think we have to be careful how and when we reduce that environmental review. Because environmental reviews serve a really good purpose for protecting our environment and making sure that developments are sustainable. So I think while we have to expedite, we have to be careful. What's the impervious surfaces going to be? How high is it going to be? Things like that. Because some of the people who push hardest to reduce the oversight are the people that have no intention of really building sound environmental projects.
A few points. So Sightline just recently published an article about the design review process in Seattle, and the slide that I showed this morning of that particular project on Finney Ridge is from that, and I encourage you to take a look at that because it talks about not the specific proposal that the City Council is right now considering and our critique of it, and also talks about design review in other cities. Seattle's design review process is actually quite unusual in the degree to which it relies on volunteer boards. There are better models that we could adopt. And about the environmental review, we should have, there's an appropriate place for environmental review, and our process is an invitation for lawsuits that slow down development. The State Environmental Policy Act was written before most of the codes that encourage or require environmental performance in the city of Seattle went into place. So what we ought to do is an environmental impact statement, not project by project, but for whole development plans, so that if the proposal then complies with the plan, then you wouldn't need to do a separate environmental review. So that's on the review process. Two thoughts about engagement. I am an idealist about community engagement, and also I'm a realist/cynic. When people's primary asset, sometimes worth $1 million, is at stake, people tend to be extraordinarily risk averse and extremely motivated to involve themselves in the process and fend off change. So I'm really interested in policy models that create some counter incentive, some financial incentive. There's a proposal in London, for example, that would allow individual blocks that are currently zoned single family to upzone themselves when you had a supermajority of property owners voting to do so. Everyone benefits from their own property being upzoned, but they lose from neighbors doing it. And so the idea there is, what if you create a small enough unit where you can have neighbors talk with each other and decide, and then in London the idea was to have a sort of a standard design that you would move up to. I'm not sure if that's the right solution, but the incentives are so financial and intense around the current zoning system. Another example of this that I'm very excited about, and that is in the Hollow recommendation, is called parking benefit districts. There's a proposal that the council has adopted to do a pilot project in the Capitol Hill Eco District of a parking benefit district. The idea of a parking benefit district, well, there are a number of varieties of it, but for example, in an area where we already have a residential parking zone where there already are permits, the idea is to allow the neighborhood, or maybe just the block, to issue additional permits, but to keep the money from issuing them, like you auction off an extra permit. This begins to invert or confuse the local sort of self-interest calculation. So for example, you're funding a neighborhood pool of money that can be spent on neighborhood parks or on graffiti removal or whatever the neighborhood wants to spend it on, and you're paying for it by marketizing the on-street parking, because right now fear about outsiders parking on my block is one of the strong motivators for some people who are opposed to development. Again, these kind of approaches are less about traditional community engagement of conversation and more about changing the incentives for players in the local land use politics.
All right. This could go on for hours. I am like so...
Just getting started.
I know.
Yeah, I know. It does feel like we just got started. I just want to say how humbled I am to talk and ask you guys questions. You guys, we're going to, City of Seattle, with the combination of all these minds, however this whole thing turns out, we're going to be well served. And I really sincerely appreciate that. And I hope you guys engage with Sightline as much as you can as a local think tank. They do great work. Thank you all for joining this panel and for offering your questions. Again, it was just an honor for me. So